Hello, everyone, and welcome to COM 466 Persuasion and Social Movements for week 4. Today, we are talking about the chapter in your book that addresses the stages that a movement goes through. The last time that we met, we talked about ways of defining a social movement and some of the ways that we persuade in a social movement. Today, I want to talk about this theory that a lot of people buy into, that there's an incredible, sort of really distinct way to talk about the stages of social movements. Now, I'm going to be the first to disagree and say that these stages are not quite as clear cut as the book makes them sound, but we'll discuss that after we get through the chapter. So let's start there. According to Stewart Smith and Denton, there's 5 stages to a social movement. The first is called Genesis. Now, this one's really hard to understand. If you were looking around and noticed that people were getting upset about something, maybe something very specific, maybe something more general, and you started to notice like rumblings, if you will, sort of undercurrents of questioning of a value or a social norm or a societal norm of some kind, and you just start looking at it. That is Genesis. So it's really almost invisible. The last time that I talked to you all, I used the social movement I work on to demonstrate to you the sort of ways of defining social movements and how people get involved. So today I'm going to talk to you about the same thing. I'm going to use that same social movement to talk about stages. So if I was involved at the very beginning, which I was, the genesis of the movement for U-Turn in education would have started with a group of about 6 to 8 parents of students at the senior high school in Nixa. These parents were concerned because books were being removed from the library and they were being challenged, and all of a sudden everything that they thought their students had access to, they no longer had access to. So those rumblings, I joke, I say, well, really the movement started with 6 or 8 people sitting around my dining room table. And that's true in part. They first met socially to sort of get to know each other before then, but they met at a restaurant. It was very public, and it was just sort of to sit around and see what page they were all on. And then that was taken to a social media account that was private and protected and double encrypted and everything else, and decided to have a conversation there. And there they had a conversation about, and invited me in, about what to do, where to go next, what move to make next, because of these books being banned. And then we found out a bunch of other things that were going on at the schools, and that's when we decided to make the problem for us got defined as much bigger at that point. And so we started moving a little bit more to a little more expansive of a movement. Okay, so Genesis is really hard to see. It's kind of difficult to know that it's happening until after it's happened, unless you're in it. And generally it's very few people who sort of have these rumblings, or maybe it's something you pick up on social media that is happening in the public discourse. But either way, it's an undercurrent. The next one is social unrest, and social unrest is much more visible. Okay, so social unrest is when the movement actually becomes visible, when the problems are seen by the general public and are a part of the public discourse pretty much continuously. Social unrest sounds like it might be violent, but it's not necessarily violent. This I put akin to when we started gathering a few more members to our core team, and we started spreading the word that, hey, this wasn't okay. We needed to stop people from doing this because it was going to get out of hand. This is when you start predicting things like that the unrest that we feel right now will get worse. And that's when you start to publicize and gather a little more strength, because in this movement, or in this part of the movement, which I just deleted everything. Okay, there we go. In this part of the movement, or in this stage of a movement, you're not known at least not well known yet. So maybe you're known as part of the community, but not a lot of people have heard of you just yet. And so you're going to be moving to the next stage by making yourselves a lot more visible. For right now, you might put up a web page, you might have go to a couple of meetings, you might for us, I really feel like we were in social unrest when we started wearing these badges that said U-turn in education. That's literally all they said. And we started showing up to school board meetings and commissioner meetings and library board meetings to sort of say, hey, we're here and we're watching you, to make ourselves more visible. The next step then is, I really can't see without my glasses, y'all. I'm just got to tell you that right now, is enthusiastic mobilization. And in case you're wondering how am I reading this really small print on my phone, well, the answer is that I know what it says. I just have to remind myself. So I see two words. I know there's two words there. That's about all I know. But enthusiastic mobilization is next. And this is when you really go out there and attempt to garner more interest in your cause, when you're bringing people in and you're also sending more messaging out. So you're becoming way more publicized. Mobilization is very, very difficult. And when we talk about leadership styles, which I think is the next chapter, when we talk about that, we'll talk more about how we go about mobilizing people, because mobilizing people requires them to actually move, which means that you have to give them motivation to do so. And so this is when, identity politics and our adherence to the social norms that we're challenging or that we want to change or that we want to keep the same or whatever it is that we're trying to do, whichever kind of movement it is. For us, we'd had a website set up. We printed up some badges, and then we decided in June of 2023 that was going to be our coming out party. And so we went to Pride Fest in Springfield, and we had a booth, and we had, let's see, what all did we have? We had stickers, we had pins, we had our badges, of course. We had books that authors had signed and gave to us to raffle off. And this was just our way of coming out to the public and saying, hey, we're here. And you might want to join us. You might want to fight with us. You might want to start your own branch of U-turn in education or some similar movement to protect your schools and intellectual freedom in your schools. At that time, and even now, Springfield doesn't nearly have the problems that Nixa does. There's not nearly as many challenges to the curriculum or challenges to what teachers want to do in the schools. But for some reason, the school board is still a pretty big deal when it comes to election time, and that's the case down here now, too. So one of the things that we did was we ran 2 people for school board last year. I was one of them. I will be another one of them today. Or this year, sorry. Right now, I'm currently in the middle of a campaign. And here's the thing, okay? In order to mobilize, you're going to find out that you have to be visible in the public too. That nobody is going to want to jump on the train with you if you're not driving the train. So I try to tell people all the time, yes, it's true. We have 150 members, but it seems like we've got the same 8 to 12 people who are going out all of the time, myself included, and they're all members of the board. We are the most active, the most visible, the loudest, and that's okay because that's how movements function sometimes. And this leadership styles we'll talk about next time, it sort of emerges more than you dictate it, right? So you can't say like, well, I'm going to have this leadership style and this is the way it's going to work and here's the hierarchy. But in a movement, it sort of evolves over time. Remember, I think I said last time that I don't see movements as revolutionary so much as evolutionary. This is part of that the movement itself has to evolve as time goes by. And then you pick up new, you sort of coalesce with other groups and organizations. You start to pick up new fights that you want to have, new battles that you want to have, because remember, you have to have opposition. So you're fighting against something almost all of the time. And so maybe you find new things that you want to fight against. However this looks, enthusiastic mobilization is really in the stage of the movement where they're maybe at their height, okay? Because the next phase, and I believe it's called maintenance. I'm going to try to pretend like I can see, and I really can't. I don't even know what chapter that is. I can't see right now. Chapter 4. There we go. It is maintenance. Look at that. And in maintenance, this is where things get sort of like might fall into a lull where people are like, oh, yeah, you guys exist. We know what you do. And a lot of times we have to like perk people's ears up and say that's not only what we do, that we do a lot of things, a lot of different things than people think of. And I did this actually with the school board members just last week. I went to lunch with a few of the current school board members. And one of the things I mentioned was how U-turn education is really about keeping schools public, that advocating for public schools, speaking out against things like SB 190, and speaking out against the government wanting to establish magnet schools or charter schools or whatever it is that they think that they want to do in lieu of public education. And, you know, of course, the school board members and myself have that in common. And so all of a sudden they're like, oh, crap, we agree with her. Now what do we do? Because U-turn was always seen as in opposition to the school board. And certainly that was part of it. It's not part of it anymore because, you know, your values become more aligned at some point. Now, will we disagree again? I'm sure we will. But for right now, the end goal is aligned. We want to support public education, and school boards, school districts, and us, we all want to do that. So we have the same end goal. We have to go about it different ways, but we can find each other very, very useful. Especially rhetorically, because if there are people out there who say, well, I don't want anything to do with that movement, or I don't want to have anything to do with the school board, and they're backing U-turn or they're backing the school board. That's how we grow our audience. We bring more people into the movement by saying, hey, we align with the school board. If you support the school board, you should support us, and vice versa. It's sort of a win-win for everybody. But in the maintenance stage, things start to slow down because people assume that they know who you are. They assume that they know what you're going to be doing. And so there are multiple ways, and your book describes these very well, I think. There's multiple ways to increase or restart or sort of relight the fire, the ignition, whatever metaphor you want to use, of mobilizing. Some of those are fine. For example, taking on new values or new fights, battles that you want to take on, to bringing out new information or having a major attention-getting event like going to Pride or like having an event by your group or organization or participating in a parade. I mean, there's all these things that you could do to draw attention. Another thing is to create a crisis, to literally cause a problem. And I don't mean this in a violent way or anything like that for us, especially. For us, it would be something like, oh, look, they're getting rid of this book now. Or, oh, look, the curriculum won't even allow us to do this anymore. Sort of beef up the sort of urgency and the primacy for people, put it at the forefront of their minds and make it very, very important to them. One of the things that we always have happen is during the summertime and during the Christmas time, or the holiday time, I should say, people are just checked out. They don't want anything to do with freaking U-turn or school boards or anything else because they're out of school. They don't want to think about it. That's not what that's there for. And so we have to sort of always regroup about every 6 months. By we, I mean my organization, particularly my board. We have to regroup and say, okay, what's going to be the next thing that we do over the course of the fall semester, the spring semester, and so on. So you can create a crisis. I don't recommend creating a harmful crisis, but create some sort of like crisis for people to sort of grab onto again, to know that the fight still needs to happen. And this happens a lot in civil rights movements, right? Because it's like, oh, well, you know, we got rid of slavery, so we're done. No, that's not how that works. There's other fights to be had. And there's other battles to win. And in fact, we're coming right back to equality. equality, equity in how people are treated by police forces, for example. So whenever there is a major crisis, say the George Floyd murder, whenever something like that happens, then you're going to remobilize, right? It's going to spark that mobilization to become even more important again. And so that's sort of where that is. Now, the last part of the cycle that this talks about, or the last part of the stages, I should say, of social movements is termination, which the way that Stuart Smith and Denton define it literally means like either you've succeeded in getting everything you want to get done and you fizzle out because you're not needed anymore, or you become a part of the institution that you were uninstitutionalized from in the beginning that you want to become a part of. We are none of that right now. I think that if I get elected to the school board, people will say, well, you're partially institutionalized now, so you were successful in that. What else could you possibly have to fight about? There's always going to be something else to fight about. Let's just be honest. But the perception is that you're part of an institution now, so you don't need to exist anymore. So justifying the movement's existence is really, really difficult if people view your movement as terminated. So one of the things that you don't want to do is allow it to be viewed as if it's terminated for, all eternity. You need to find something else. And so more than just a stages of development and decrease, devolvement, I guess, is the idea that this is more circular, that there is a cycle that this goes through, and you go through all the 5 stages and then you come back around to the beginning and you go through all of them again, and you continually go through these 5 stages. And the stages are not set in like the length of time that they each take or what needs to be done in each of those. And I'll be honest with you, I don't think that you need genesis and termination when you've got a functional social movement. I think that's silly to say, well, let's go back and start from the beginning because we finished. That's not the way that works. More likely, and this is my theory of things, so I want to make it clear that nobody else makes this argument, at least not in published scholarship, but I make it, and there are people out there who do agree with me, believe it or not, that what we actually do is once a social movement gets started, it then spends whatever amount of time, an undefined amount of time, going through those next 3 stages. So, social unrest, mobilization, and maintenance. And you go through these 3 stages over and over again, and you don't terminate necessarily. Some social movements, I guess I could find a few that terminated, but more likely than not, they sort of adopted new social norms that they wanted to fight against or fight for, or new values that they wanted to fight for. And so that's how they maintained themselves, is by creating this next thing that needs to be done. So I don't know if that's clear or not, but for me, it's cyclonic. I don't know how else to explain that. It's shaped like a cyclone. Once you get the movement started and it starts spinning around and around and around, it will, speed up and slow down at its own, sort of as it takes its own course, as it evolves, and changes and hits barriers and responds to those, and hits opposition and responds to that, and so on. And then you really don't terminate until everything you could possibly want is adopted, or you become institutionalized, like we become an institution. So that brings up an interesting question, I think, for U-Turn in education. It started out as a social movement. It ended up as a nonprofit. So we are now a nonprofit that supports getting books into schools that need them, serving the rural areas, which Nixa is a rural area by national standards, right? But it's really suburban by standards of this region. So rural areas, getting poorer school districts the either funds or the books or materials that they need in order to help students. Over the summertime, we do Project Book Bag, which helps students get snacks, hygiene products, books, school supplies for the summertime, because if you're not in school, you're not getting those things, right, that the school actually supplies to these students or provides for these students. So we do that over the summertime to sort of help them through it a little bit. And so we are looking at education holistically, and we believe in as much as like sort of the formalized public school system as much as community education. So, people who have graduated from high school or who have left school, who are no longer in school, who just want to learn something. We do, short courses, we do all kinds of public education. Since we are now a nonprofit, some people would argue that means that we are part of the government. We are part of the institution. And I don't think they're completely wrong. At that point, does that mean the movement has stopped and we're no longer functioning as a movement? I don't know. I'm willing to debate that. Personally, seeing it from the inside, I see a lot of things that I have to do that are more based in getting out the word and getting out the messaging to keep the movement going. But some others would argue that, look, you're a 501c3, you no longer have to pay taxes, you can write receipts, you can accept donations, all of these things you can do without, doing a lot more grassroots work. So therefore, you're now a top-down organization, you're part of the institution, and you're no longer a movement, you've now moved into the institution phase. And I guess I'm okay with that. It just seems like I have to do a lot more on the grassroots side than that would suggest. All right, so 5 stages of a social movement takes you all the way from genesis to social unrest to enthusiastic mobilization to maintenance to termination. And for me, steps 2, 3, and 4, stages 2, 3, and 4 are where most social movements live. Very rarely, like I said, have I been able to say, well, this movement terminated, but that depends on how you define terminating a social movement. So one of the things I may have you ruminate on for the next week is there a such thing as terminating a social movement, or does it just restart and go back and recycle itself? Start thinking about that, and we'll see what we do with that here in the next week. In the meantime, keep reading. We'll be in touch with you about assignments that might be coming up sooner rather than later. Although most of yours are due at the end of the semester, I'm sure you would like to hear about them. So I think I can probably do that and let you know what you should be thinking for your papers. So there we go. That's it for this week. I will see you all next week.